Tonight's speaker has a Ph.D. from Purdue University in Bionucleonics. And he came to Mound in 1978. And he did a radon program here at Mound, and he'll talk about that tonight somewhat. And he also is responsible for forming a radon reference laboratory at Bowser-Morner. So tonight, please welcome Dr. Phil Jenkins.
Thank you. I guess I'm on. It must be a slow night for entertainment in Dayton. I really appreciate you coming out to hear me. Some of you may remember me from Mound. I'm hoping that there are some people here that just want to hear something about radon. So I am going to spend a few minutes talking about the radon program at Mound. Even those of you that were at Mound may have known there was a radon program, or probably didn't know anything about it, because we kind of kept to ourselves. And as you know, a lot of things are going on at Mound that I didn't know about either. And then I'm going to talk about the radon at Bowser-Morner and the radon laboratory there for a few minutes, and then I'm going to give pretty much a general radon talk that I might give to churches or other portions of the general public. So I wanted to express, wrong button. I'm getting a little feedback, so I don't know whether that needs to go down a little bit, or I need to talk. Just wanted to thank Dick and Ned for helping me get some slides out of the archives. I was kind of surprised how many there were that related to radon. Well, it started back in '79. I'd only been here a short period of time, and DOE had already started a radon monitoring program at some sites around, actually only at one site so far, and that was started by the Environmental Measurements Laboratory, or EML, out of New York. And it was quickly obvious that this was something bigger than DOE should be involved with. They were looking for a contractor to take over radon monitoring at a number of sites involved with their remedial action programs. So I knew what radon was. I'd had a little experience with radon at Tennessee Valley Authority, and I got involved in, before long, when a radon group was formed, and a young man named Bill Yates, if some of you remember that name, was named the manager. EML had started monitoring at Canonsburg, Pennsylvania, and so that's where we took over as, I keep hitting the wrong button. Here's an early picture of some of the people in the radon group, and some of you may recognize some faces. There's Bill Yates, Steve Saris, Dick Hagee, Phil Gephardt. That looks like Mr. Figgins. I frankly don't remember what all you did with the radon group. I don't think you were an official member, were you?
Yes and no. Time or something.
Believe it or not, that's me. And Jack Jarvis, Pat Rowland, Mary Lou Smith, and I think her name was Karen, and I can't come up with her name to save my life. But anyway, the group did change over the years. One thing I can tell you for sure, if you're with radon long enough, it'll turn your hair white. Let's see, over the years, Bill was the first manager. I was interim manager a couple of times. Cliff Rudy was manager for a while. Secretaries, Mary Lou Smith, Joan Danner. Betty Peters was on staff for a while, and then she moved into secretary after Joan retired. And let's see, I mentioned just about everybody here. There was a guy named John Hall that was here for a while. And I may have forgotten a few people. It's been a few years. Okay, so the first site we were involved with was at Canonsburg, Pennsylvania. This was an early radium processing facility. As you could probably recall, that radium was used in quack medicine in the early 1900s, and a lot of that came from this site. that's south of Pittsburgh. It was included in DOE's remedial action only because during the 40s, because they took out the radium, but they left the uranium behind. And so literally the streets of Canonsburg were filled with tailings that had uranium in them. So they literally mined the streets of Canonsburg to get uranium out for the Manhattan Project. And that's the only reason it was included in DOE's remedial action programs. It really didn't fit anywhere, but they put it under ultra, and I'll tell you what ultra means here in just a minute. Tell you how far back that goes. That's Madame Curie standing there at the Canonsburg site. Everybody wants to know where her other foot is. And the story is that they gave her something like 2 curies or 2 grams of radium to take back with her, and she probably put it in her suitcase. And, anyway, let's see. The monitor we chose is called a PERM. It was actually invented at EML, and I don't have time to explain to you what that is unless you want to know later. But the plan was to locate one of these monitors outdoors on the site boundary in each of the 16 wind directions, and then go out in the same direction at spaced intervals. And as I recall, it might have been 500 meters, 1,500 meters, 2,500 meters, and then locate 10 more monitors remotely to determine what the background was in the area. Let's see. The detectors were changed out weekly, so we got actually got weekly average measurements. The idea was to continue to monitor for 1 year after the remedial action was completed, to just show that the annual average had dropped essentially to background. I'm having a hard time seeing the screen here, so I'm going to move a little bit. That actually did change later, which I'll mention. Let's see. Oh, well, setting up a network like this is not easy. You got to have a local person to help you. That's absolutely crucial. You got to go to all the property owners and get written permission to put a monitor on their property, and that's not easy either. It takes a long time to set up a network like this. And then inevitably there'll be political considerations, like the mayor wants one on his property. They want one in all the schools. So I think we ended up with 52 monitors, weekly measurements, 52 locations, mostly outdoors, but some indoors, primarily at schools, for about 5 or 6 years. It also takes a local subcontractor there to change out things. Let's see, monitoring began in early 80. We established a background of 0.3, which is pretty common for the eastern United States. Near off-site locations, particularly downwind, were higher than that. It was pretty obvious to see a signal from the site itself, where there was a lot of residue, still radium-bearing residues buried. The monitor continued actually until the annual average was below regulatory level, but not necessarily background, and then we stopped. And you'll see in my slides, everything stopped in 86, and you'll find out why here in a few minutes. The next site we got involved with is in Middlesex, New Jersey, and this was part of the FUSRAP site, FUSRAP program, a formerly utilized sites remedial action program, where most of these sites, maybe all of them, was where ore from Africa that came into this country was processed in one way or another for the Manhattan Project. At Middlesex, the ore came in, it was sampled, it was graded, and then it was sent on to somewhere else, but there was still a lot of residues left, and some of them inevitably migrated. By the way, back in Canonsburg, because of the nature of that site, there was contamination everywhere. There was 2 or 3 actually towns clustered together. The nearest one is Strabane, and in Strabane there was material used, luckily not in the construction of houses, but mainly add-ons like front porches, garages, fill dirt. So there was a lot of off-site cleanup and tearing things down and rebuilding to do. Here at Middlesex, probably the biggest problem there was a rectory where there was a lot of contaminated material. There was also a garage that had to be torn down and rebuilt. Here, essentially the same process as at Canonsburg, but it was New Jersey after all, so it wasn't as easy as Canonsburg even. And then we monitored from, I don't remember when in 80 we started, but then in 86 it stopped. The subcontractor was students from Rutgers. The third site we got involved with was originally, when we got involved with it, was called Lake Ontario Ordnance Works. And it's also was known as the Niagara Falls Storage Site. It's another fruit wrap site. Waste highly contaminated with radium were stored there. Notably a material called K65, which was highly enriched in radium-226. And you'll hear that again here in a little while. Same approach to the other sites, but there was someone that was actually working on site that could be the subcontractor. And again, 80 to 86. The next site we got involved with was an ultra site in Salt Lake City. This truly was an abandoned uranium mill tailings pile. And material had been used out in the community, particularly a fire station where even in the dormitory of the firehouse, upstairs, it was over 100 picocuries per liter, which is pretty impressive. And that was an interesting remediation to watch, but I don't have time to talk about. Here's actually part of the tailings pile. There's Bill Yates. The mountains in the back of their snow covered are about 10 or 20 miles away. So it was rather impressive. Monitoring approach similar. Monitoring, I think we started in 81 to 86, for about 5 years.
Sure.
And then Strip Rock, New Mexico, another UMTRA site, abandoned uranium mill tailings. This one was on Navajo land, so a Navajo contractor was absolutely essential. And this was the last time we used perms to get weekly measurements. The perms actually were so labor intensive that it was an expensive thing to use, but it was the best thing to use at the time to be able to measure actually outdoor environmental levels on a weekly basis. We were forced to switch to alpha tracks because they were cheaper, and for those we did quarterly measurements. And in my opinion, those devices back in that day were not very good, so I wasn't real happy about it, but it was what it was. And here's some other sites we were involved with this device. 2 in Arizona, 1 in New Mexico, 2 in Colorado, and 1 in Oregon. So we were scattered all over the country. Made for a lot of travel. And then it became obvious that we couldn't rely on sending devices or actually trucking devices to New York City to EML to get them calibrated. We needed our own calibration facility. So we needed our own radon chamber. And so we visited chambers that we knew of in the US and Canada, but none of them had temperature and humidity control. And I kept telling Bill we needed temperature and humidity control, and he kept saying, is that something you really want? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, well, then you'll have it. So in 81, we built a walk-in radon chamber. Norm Plyman was the engineer involved. You remember Norm Plyman?
Oh, yeah.
We used an external conditioning chamber as an external environmental chamber as a conditioning chamber. It was really a nice chamber. And it probably was the first one ever made that had temperature and humidity control. This is basically, you can't read that very well, it's blurred, but this is basically the layout of the chamber. The chamber itself was 9 by 9 by 8 feet tall. On the interior, there was an anteroom here where you could first enter here and then close the door, and then you enter in here and then place devices inside the chamber for exposure.
What building was that in?
I'm sorry?
What building was
It
that
was
in?
in T building. It was in the second floor of T building. There's another drawing. I was surprised I had these drawings, and I will turn them into the museum. What this doesn't show is the conditioning chamber, which was sitting over here. This was a viewing port. This was supposed to be a pass-through door, but we never used it for that. So for its time, I think we pushed the state of the art in 1981 when we built this, and it wasn't long before other chambers in the government retrofitted theirs or built new ones that had temperature and humidity control. And it became necessary for other reasons a couple of years ago to have temperature and humidity control, so we were a little ahead of our time. Here's a picture from when it was being put together. There was actually a false wall over here that the conditioned air with the radon came in behind that false wall that was perforated, and it swept across the room and then back out from another false wall and made a closed loop more or less with the conditioning chamber. These are the only two pictures I have of the chamber when it was actually usable. I'll get to that in a minute. I'm getting to it right now. There was a flaw in the design, and I'll get to that later, but because it raised its head a few years later. And also I need to recognize that Ken Foster had a huge role in getting equipment interfaced and software written. This was back before any of us had ever seen an IBM PC or heard of MS-DOS. And I did not, at the time, I knew nothing about microcomputers or interfacing to equipment, which I do now, but Ken Foster was invaluable at the time. Here's a picture of Jack Jarvis working on it. That might be John Hall back there. This was a rather bulky monitor. Well, I think we had 2 or 3 of them. We actually had a mobile laboratory. I don't know how Bill Yates pulled that off, but this was really a sweet vehicle, and it was set up in the trailer there as a mobile laboratory. Ultimately, I transferred that to an Oak Ridge group that was in Grand Junction, Colorado. Oh, and here's the end. 86, we finished Canonsburg. And when we finished Canonsburg, that was the only UMTRA site that was in the east. And UMTRA was out of Albuquerque. It was administered out of Albuquerque. All the rest of them were out west. And they decided to start using the group at Grand Junction instead of Mound. Well, actually it makes sense because of travel costs and so forth. But that was 75% of our funding. And so when we lost that, we didn't have enough money left to keep the group going. So we just had to abandon the FUSREP sites too. We had to disband the group. But at the same time, in 1986, I was getting requests from private radon companies that were coming into being because of an awareness that there's radon naturally occurring in homes that is more elevated than anybody thought was ever possible. And I kept getting these requests, and eventually I asked Albuquerque Operations for permission to use the chamber to support private industry, and their response was, yes, you could do that as long as there's no private company out there with which you are competing. And at the time there was not. These people were begging me, please, you're the only lab we can go to. And so after this project ended, we started using the chamber to support, this was just very, very part-time to support private industry. But it started growing, it started, you know, over the years, it started growing into more and more. Here's some pictures from Mound View, fall of '87. So this is after the radon group was disbanded, but here's Jack analyzing, this is called a scintillation cell that he's analyzing for radon. There's me, looks like a wild scientist there, actually inside the chamber, posing like I'm taking data. And here's me, and this is the source of the radon. It was radium in a liquid form, and we bubbled air through it to sweep the radon off of it. And actually it was a fairly hot source, more than probably was needed at the time. And here's some couple pictures from Undermound in May of '89. At this time, EG&G has taken over, and EG&G was actually considering spinning this out as a private company in Miamisburg, and I was hoping that they were going to do that because I wanted to keep it going, and then they decided not to. You'll notice here it says Mound is one of 6 radon calibration facilities operated by the government. There are none left. They're all gone. Laboratories like that one and like the one I have at Bowser-Morner that were in the federal government are now all gone. So anyway, when EG&G abandoned the idea, I was kind of down the dumps, but I lived with it for a couple of years. And notice Senator Horn was there, and I even had a coat and tie on. That's a special occasion. I got a coat and tie on. I hope this isn't the same tie. So this is the end of the chamber. This was a sad day. In September of '89, it might have even been my birthday, I don't remember. The aforementioned flaw raised its head. Here was the flaw. The environmental chamber that was supplying humidity was attached to the plant steam system. So it was like attached to an infant supply of live steam. Bad idea. Thank you, Norm. And we actually had the equipment to change it to something better, and we hadn't installed it yet. But on a Friday night about 8 p.m., the steam valve opened, and it stayed open for about 24 hours. The chamber filled with live steam for hours. The chamber heated up to well over 200 degrees, probably even over 220 degrees. And the walls, the ceiling and floor panels were all contained 4 inches of polyurethane foam. When polyurethane foam gets that hot, it expands with great force. It's just like water freezing. There's nothing that's going to stop it. And it literally ripped the chamber apart. And what's ironic is the Saturday while all this was going on, we had an open house that day. Not in T-Building. But I was at the weather station right beside the entrance to T-Building on the east side, I guess. And I thought of it before I went home. I said, you know, I ought to run down and see what's going on with the chamber, make sure it's okay. And then I said, nah, I'm going home. But I came that close to walking in on it, and I could have actually gotten hurt. And we were very fortunate that nobody did get hurt. But I walked in Monday morning. The following Monday morning, it was all over by then. And I found a problem. First of all, the first thing I saw, because I came around this corner here, it doesn't look like there's any passageway there, but there was. I came around that corner and here this door is ajar. Well, that's not supposed to be possible for that door to be ajar. It just closes all by itself. So I'm standing there going, why isn't the door closing? Well, and this is the other side of the door. You see everything that was plastic is just melted. I look up and I see something like this, where the panels were just ripped apart. And I am just, you can see the doors open, the panels are ripped apart all the way down. So I was just absolutely floored, you know, and I just shut everything down and went to my boss and said, well, the chamber is gone. That's it. It wasn't being used for DOE anymore, so there was no rebuilding it. So anyway, sad day. So is there any questions at this point?
Yeah, did somebody find it and shut the steam off, or did the valve unstick and close?
I think it just unstuck and closed by itself. But from the data set that was saved on the computer, I could tell when that happened. And I could tell temperature up to a point until the temperature sensor failed.
But somebody from the plant services didn't say, where's that steam going? And
I don't think so. I don't think so. It was such a small amount of steam compared
They never
to the plant, it would be unnoticeable. Yeah. Yeah.
What sort of steam pressure did the plant run?
I have no idea. Now, that could have been throttled down. My guess is it was, but,
Probably 600 pounds throttled down.
yeah, I have no idea. But when that steam valve would open, the environmental chamber was actually pretty large, and it had a viewing window, and when the steam valve came on, that and the problem with that is, well, that's one problem. The other problem is it also introduces a lot of heat. So then the chamber is fighting itself to get humidity, but also remove the heat to keep the temperature constant. So it was a design flaw from the very beginning. And like I said, we were going to change it, but we just didn't get around to it. So I was kind of on thin ice at that time anyway, because there were some private chambers that we were really starting to compete with. And I was going to have to stop anyway soon, but I didn't want to stop this way. I wanted to be able to access that chamber, and I really wanted to spin it out, is what I really wanted to do. But that's the way it goes. Three other things that I thought I'd mention in passing here. Shortly after I arrived here in '79, just as we were just starting to think about the radon project at Mound, we discovered some rather high levels of all three radons, all three naturally occurring radons under SW&R buildings. And this was my baptism into separating radon decay products from all three as a mixture. And so this was an incredible learning experience for me, and it's served me well ever since. But and then I made suggestions of what we needed to do to fix it, and so radon was getting into an area that was exposing at least one employee, and this was my first and only radon mitigation project, and it was successful. We fixed the problem. And also, over the years, one thing that never occurred to me was people bringing in radon and decay products in their lungs from home. And we started having, this probably had been happening a long time, but since we were, we had a radon group, and you got a lung count about twice a year, right? If you were a plutonium worker. So people would come in from home and they go and get a lung count, and it would be abnormal. And they'd say, well, we know this isn't plutonium. but it's not normal, it's hot. Come back after lunch and let's try it again. So they come back after lunch, it'd be normal, and they'd say, it's radon. You brought it in from your house. They call me up, and I would give them some charcoal canisters to take home and spread around their house and make the measurement and tell them what the level was. And it was nearly always this time of year, August, September, early October. Very often it was somebody from Carlisle or Chautauqua. And then after September, October, the weather patterns change and this would all disappear. This was my first inkling that high radon in this area occurs in late summer, early fall. I had other inklings too, but this was my first, yeah.
Has anybody ever checked on the health of these people that high radon in the lungs?
That I don't know. That I don't know.
Are those high concentrations in those months related to low wind speeds?
Absolutely,
Just the calm of the late summer?
absolutely. There's a lot of reasons. I can tell you what I think they are, but it's my opinion. Hot and dry. We get long periods, usually this time of year or a little later, we get long periods with no rain. Our soil's like clay. It gets hard, it cracks. It's still hot. The diffusion coefficient of radon is as high as it's ever going to be in the soil. The soil is as dry as it's going to be, and the radon can come from large volumes of soil. And then we have, on top of that, we have low wind speeds, thermal inversions. If a radon comes out, it's got nowhere to go. It's trapped. There's like a lid, and I knew all along that this happens outdoors. What I didn't know all along is it happens indoors too. Okay, that's what I think goes on. And then when all that that period ends, and it gets colder and it gets wetter, the clay gets wet, it seals back up, and we don't get as much radon coming out of the soil. Okay, so I don't know, I don't know whether these people did anything about the radon in their house, but some of them were rather impressive levels, like occupational levels. I'm sure that most people that worked at Mound got more radon dose in their homes than they ever got at Mound. Most people, anyway. And then also we did a lot of monitoring around Fernald, because Fernald had the rest of this K65 materials in storage down there. And so we monitored around the periphery of Fernald for a while, and we tried to make we did make measurements on top of the silos down there where the K65 was stored. And they actually sent me a sample of the gas from the headspace of one of the silos, and that's the largest radon measurement I've ever made in my life. It was like 30 million picocuries per liter. And every measurement piece of data I saw after that agreed with my measurement. It was around 30 million. But all that's been cleaned up, of course, now. Okay. So, 91, after 2 years of trying to find a way to go private, Bowser-Morner up in Huber Heights gave me the opportunity to start over. This wasn't what I would call a spin out, it was just a start over. So I started from scratch. It was a huge investment for Bowser-Morner. So from June of 91 to April of 92 was designing and procuring and putting things together, putting a radon chamber together, bigger and better. Again, I looked at other chambers around the country before I did this. And also, we're an independent laboratory, which means we don't compete with our actual clients. We don't compete. We don't do radon measurements in homes or buildings. We don't do mitigation. We don't manufacture something and sell something. Bowser-Morner as a company doesn't sell things. It sells services. and they already had an NRC license, and so it was really a good fit for me to go there. I'm just grateful that they gave me the opportunity and invested a lot of money on me, actually. And it took a long time because of this. With no other source of income, it took a very long time for us to even break even, much less make a profit. That's the one major disadvantage of going private and not government, is you gotta make money. You know, it's not spending money anymore, it's making money. So, some of the things we do, we provide quality control exposures in our chamber to control conditions for calibration, spiking, performance testing, even the dosimeters that the uranium miners in Canada wear, and sometimes research and development. It's a really nice research tool. Yeah.
What does spiking mean?
Okay, I was going to explain that. I thought, well, I'll wait until somebody asks.
Well, the rest of them all make sense.
Well, there's really no difference between performance testing and spiking, except that performance testing is done blind. We don't tell them what it was exposed to. But if it's just a spike, it's just somebody might say, hey, I need this device exposed to 20 picocuries per liter for 5 days at 70 degrees and 50% relative humidity. And so we try to do that as a spike. And then we have monthly customers that are required by their certifications that they have to do spiking every month. And so it's not blind. We tell them exactly what it was exposed to, whereas this is the same thing. It's spiking, only we don't tell them. They have to report, and then they have to be within a certain window.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Would you find much radon in an average basement here?
In an average basement. You know, you can't generalize. It's going to vary from property to property to property. That's why you got to test. You know, even back in the '86, they found a house in eastern Pennsylvania. They found it because this guy was doing exactly what I was telling you about. He came into a nuclear power plant that was under construction, hadn't even started. There was no radioactive materials there, and he was setting off all the alarms when he first came into work. And so they went to his house and they started measuring, and they found over 1,000 picocuries per liter in his house, just naturally. And that's what kicked off the private radon industry. Nobody suspected you could see that high radon levels just naturally occurring in a house. And his next door neighbor, perfectly normal. So go figure. It all depends on what's going on under your house and how your house communicates with what's going on under your house. Yeah.
Well, EPA site shows zones in the U.S. where what the ratings tend to be, picocuries. So large swath of Ohio is 4 or greater than 4. But they have a map of the U.S. and you can expand it, and it shows you the zones, what the typical readings tend to be. I'm starting to think why, especially in Ohio, we're in this band here, why they almost don't require that when they build the house. But, you know, the filtration system you can put underneath the slab. It seems like you almost want to put that in when you build it rather than come back and do remediation.
Well, yeah, I'll get to some of that in a little while here. But yeah, there are very little requirements. There's very little regulation. Part of that's the building industry has lobbyists, which are pretty large. But I'll touch on that a little later.
Okay.
Okay? Yeah.
What would be the physical or natural origin of radon found in somebody's basement?
I'll get to that too.
One thing immediately stands out of this compared to your first picture of the blown up chamber, and that's that clump of 5 copper pipes coming in at the top. What do those carry?
Oh, okay.
Looks just like the other one, very much like the other one.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. So what are those?
That's not a coincidence. Well, first of all, there's the chamber as it looks today. It's a little bigger than the one at Mound. In fact, it turns out it was the biggest one it was and still is the biggest one in North America, probably all of America's. Yeah, we sample from 3 different locations in the chamber continuously. So these 3 carry radon, well, air containing radon, over to monitors, which I'll show you in just a minute. And then this is the return for all 3 of them. Okay? The 4th one is an extra line in case I want to use it to sample for some other reason.
Thank you.
Okay? And these are connected to large Tygon tubes that go to different locations in the chamber. So they're not just pulling all from the same spot.
And that's the same function in the first one you showed us? That's for the same thing?
Yeah. I want to make sure all 3 of these agree. But it turns out it's not because there's, even if they did not, it's not because there's heterogeneous concentration in the chamber. It's because there's a problem with one of my monitors. But having 3 is the magic number. If you have one that's drifting away, you know which one immediately it is. If you only have 2, you have no idea which one is wrong. So, and then it turns out we had 4 at Mound, but 4 is one too many. 3 is the right number. I've still got a lot to go here, so. Again, they had an entrance door with an ante-room. There's a basic layout. It's very similar to the one at Las Vegas, which really isn't in use anymore, just recently. You enter here. I saved a little money by not extending that little room out any farther. And then you enter the big room here. And this is, instead of 9 by 9 by 8, this is 12 by 12 by 9. So it's that much bigger. It's actually a little bit, I thought it was exactly the same size as the one at Vegas, but it's actually bigger. And here's another layout that shows, here's the conditioning chamber. Radon goes in here, and then it goes into ducts in the ceiling, and it sweeps down to the floor, and it's pulled off of the floor back from this duct. So this forms more or less a closed loop, where we inject radon continuously in here, it goes there, and then it goes to the chamber.
I think your mic just died, Phil.
What did it? I'll talk loud. Oh, sorry. I'll keep going loud. I'll try it. I'll talk as loud as I can. There it is, the conditioning chamber. It's a lot smaller than the one we had at Mound, but it's also not connected to the plain steam system. Learn by lesson. Here are the radon sources. They're actually solid radium sources that we sweep dry air through. You can see the activities there. I sized these to have as little radium to license as possible, and also to have as little radon emissions out to the environments. These are 1.4 liter scintillation cells sitting on 5-inch photomultiplier tubes. We sample 2 liters a minute continuously through those cells, and this is a rather old system here that we use to analyze what's coming from the cells, and we're still using that vintage 1990 equipment. We're going to upgrade all of that equipment soon, we hope.
The scintillation cells are the liquid material we've heard about before here?
No, these are a cell. It's just a cell, but it's coated with zinc sulfide on the inside, and so alpha particles that strike the zinc sulfide emit light, and then you can see it with the photomultiplier tube. That's what the inside of the chamber looks like when we're really making money. Notice the nice large windows. You don't feel like you're, you don't get claustrophobic in there. You feel like you're just in another part of the lab. which was really pretty nice. We intercompare with Las Vegas at least once a year, and then they fill our simulation cells. We send them smaller ones, and then I analyze them and then report my results to private certification programs, and we have to be within 10% agreement with EPA to maintain our certification. And then we use those same cells to make measurements out of the chamber and make sure that these cells agree, the monitoring system agrees with these cells. This is our standard. These cells that we send to Las Vegas or to EPA is our standard. Any questions at this point? Because I'm going to move on to a more general. Yeah.
You said something about the Las Vegas lab no longer operating, or one chamber out there wasn't. What's the deal there, and how's that affect your calibrations?
The whole radon lab at Las Vegas is now shut down permanently. It was supposed to be moved back to Montgomery, Alabama. They are not going to rebuild a chamber at Montgomery. So they're no longer going to have a chamber. The source that they were using for this actually didn't use the chamber.
Oh, okay.
Okay? So they promised us they would still provide this. I'm not holding my breath. I'm looking for other alternatives. I'm looking to other countries. And we're going to duplicate this system at our lab. So it's up in the air right now as to what's going to happen. I'm hoping they will continue to provide that from Montgomery, but
Is there any place in the United States where radon is a problem from the underlying rock?
yeah, I'll probably do it. Battery.
Yeah, it's back on. Bring it back up.
Give me
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Hang on.
No? Oh.
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Loud and clear.
Underlying rock. Well, yeah. I mean, all rock and all soil contains radium. And particularly, in eastern Pennsylvania that I mentioned, have you ever traveled the Pennsylvania Turnpike and noticed the rock along the walls where they've dynamited to make the turnpike? It looks like somebody took a gigantic sledgehammer and went bam, because it's all shattered. And radon can just stream through huge volumes of rock. And that whole area is called the Reading Prong. It starts around Reading, Pennsylvania, and it goes northeast way up into Maine. And so that formation creates a lot of radon problems. Not just in the air, but also in well water. And a lot of people up in New England have wells, private wells. So yes, radon from rock is a huge problem in some areas. Radon from soil, huge problem in some areas. Believe it or not, Iowa, Minnesota, because of the glacial till, the soil is very, very fine, so the surface to volume ratio is very high. And the radon escapes from that soil more readily than it does in some areas of the country. So Iowa and Minnesota are high. Anyway, I'm going to move on. The more you get into radon, the more complex you realize it really is. It seems like it should be so simple. But that's why it was so fascinating for me, and I've stayed with it most of my career. You've got things like physics and math, and you've got interaction of radiation with matter, you've got measurements, and then the EPA came out in the early 90s with measurement protocols. Now we're writing standards for not just protocols, but actual standards for measurements in homes and large buildings and schools and so forth and so on. Then you got mitigation strategies. We're writing standards for mitigating homes in large buildings and schools and so forth. Epidemiology, social interactions, licensing and regulations and so forth. It covers all of these areas. And nobody's an expert in all of them. You know, I specialized in the quality assurance of measurements, and that's enough. Terrestrial sources of radiation, there's 4 naturally occurring radioactive decay series, and these 3 contain a radon. This one does not. And then there's you know, a lot of other natural things like K40 and so forth. The uranium series looks like this. It's a big long line of radioactive nuclides, starting with uranium-238, which has a very long half-life, so it feeds this whole chain for billions of years. And then you get down here to the radon, which has a half-life of 3.8 days, roughly, and then it creates these 4 things that have very short half-lives. And I always say that if you are going to design a system to maximize the lung dose to occupants of a house or a building, this is it. This is it, because this is mobile. It has a half-life that's long enough so it can migrate. And then it creates these things which get in the air and stick to the dust and other particles in the air, and you breathe them. And then they stick to you in the inside of your lungs. And these 2 poloniums emit alpha particles. Alpha particle, as long as it's outside your body, is not a problem. Alpha particle inside your body is a problem. So here these things are sitting right next to sensitive tissue in your lungs, emitting alpha particles. Your lungs act like a filter. They just filter them out, and so it just, the radon, you're not going to have radon in your lungs any higher than it is in the room that or the air you're breathing. But these things just build up until they reach an equilibrium level, and they just keep exposing your lungs. Even early on, when I started doing radon dosimetry, I couldn't believe how high the dose was. But what we didn't know way back then, this was 76, 77, what we didn't know was what the risk was from this dose, because it wasn't a whole lung dose, it was only to the bronchial epithelium. Now we know the risks are pretty high. A radon atom ejects an alpha particle, which is the same as a helium nucleus, and then creates polonium-218, which has a half-life of about 3 minutes, and then it continues to decay to other radioactive materials, which are also fairly short-lived. You probably know the jargon was something decayed to a daughter. Okay, well that's not politically correct anymore. So we don't say radon daughters anymore. But this, I had to use the slide. So yeah, here's another slide that shows the the 2 poloniums are the alpha emitters, and that's where most of the dose comes from, to the bronchial epithelium. And you can see these half-lives are fairly short.
What are your scintillators primarily detecting? Are they the alpha impacts?
Actually, all 3, because you captured the radon, or the radon is moving through it, one or the other.
But is there alpha decay particles is what are being counted?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Alpha from radon itself,
Yeah.
and alphas from these 2 poloniums.
So not the scintillator doesn't effectively detect GABAs, for
No,
example?
it does not detect beta or gamma.
Okay.
Most of you probably know all this, but radon is a chemical element. It's inert, it's one of the noble gases. Naturally occurring, you can't see it or smell it. Enters the building primarily from soil, but it could be from other sources like building materials, could be from well water. You all should know who Mike Peters is.
Oh, yeah.
So no, you can't smell radon unless it's coming from your dog. Yeah, it's back when I was in college, the only time they talked about radon was because it interfered with what you're really trying to measure, like plutonium. And it's natural. What's the big deal? Well, just because something is natural doesn't mean it's not a problem. Snake bite is perfectly natural. And actually, I think it's our largest natural disaster.
Question,
Yeah,
is radon present in any other countries?
everywhere.
Any concentration that's big? Any place?
Yes. I know in Germany, yeah, probably a lot of other places. So, let's see. I think I just explained all this. It is the second leading cause of lung cancer, a distant second to smoking, but you know what? Fewer and fewer people are smoking, and now more and more people that never smoked are getting lung cancer. And oncologists are saying, why am I seeing so many non-smokers getting lung cancer? Well, guess what? It's probably due to radon. How does it rank as a cancer-causing agent? It's a group A carcinogen. There is basis for regulatory and liability concerns, but radon isn't really regulated. The recommendation is that if you average above 4 picocuries per liter, you should mitigate your house. The average indoor is about 1.3. That may or may not be accurate, but it's probably close. Average outdoor is about 0.4. In the eastern United States, we measured 0.3. In Shipwright, New Mexico, we averaged 0.7. Outdoors, background. So annual average of 0.4 is probably about right, or for the entire country. Occupational, well, that's kind of changed maybe a little bit with NRC regulations, but basically it's 30 picocuries per liter. That's assuming you have all the radon decay products in equilibrium with the radon, which really doesn't occur very often. But it's really not hard to find 30 in homes right around here in Dayton, even higher. In other parts of Ohio, I'll get to that in a minute too. How does it compare to other things like drunk driving, drowning, fires? It's right up there. EPA estimates 21,000 deaths a year in the United States due to radon. Even if it's only a tenth of that, 2,100 deaths a year due to radon. It's too much. The news, 3 people die and it's on the news. 20,000 people die and nobody cares. Also, Beer 6 backs that up. Notice smokers versus never smokers. And all of these organizations would agree with all that. Here's your zone map. Unfortunately, but a lot of people look at this map and they say, well, this is my, I don't have to worry about it map. Because if they're in one of these 2 zones, they say, oh, well, I live in a zone 2. It's below 4. I don't have to worry about it. Well, like I said, you could have 1,000 in one house and next door could be normal. So, no, the answer is you got to test. You won't really know until you test. But frankly, if you're down here on the Gulf Coast, there's probably not going to be a radon problem. I mean, particularly houses that I've seen down around New Orleans where you got to have a boat to get there, there's no radon problem. And on the coast here, when your house is on stilts, you don't have a radon problem because you're not communicating with the soil. But notice all of this. Anyway, here's Ohio. here we are. This is all zone 1. Franklin County's high, Knox County's high. And like I said, Montgomery County, it's not hard to find over 30 here in this area in a home. Now maybe not annual average, but there's one house that I tested a lot. I used to work for the guy, and every time it came back over 30. So how does it get into your house? Well, your house goes negative pressure for lots of reasons. And anytime your house goes negative pressure, if there's any communication between the air in your house and the soil, your house is just sitting there sucking gases in from the soil. And those gases contain radon. They might contain spores and molds. They might contain volatile organics from yard treatments or who knows what. So your house is sucking all this stuff into your into the air in your house. And the radon concentration in the soil gas can be hundreds of picocuries per liter. And you're just pulling it in a little at a time, but it might elevate your house to levels that should be mitigated. Typically, lower levels are going to be higher, but that's not always true. There can be communication from the basement all the way up to the top very quickly, and so you can even see situations where this is a 10 and that's a 10 and this is a 4. That happens. Radon in water, typically from private wells. It's not drinking the water that's the problem. It's because when you turn the tap on, the radon comes out of the water. So you use the shower, you use water in cooking or whatever, the radon comes out of the water into the house and then you breathe the radon decay products. Drinking the water is not the issue. And a lot of people in New England have private wells, and that's where the high radon water is. Well, northern Illinois too.
You said there are high levels of radon in the water?
In New England, yeah.
Well, let's see now. How about the limestone rock that's around here?
Well, but if you're in a municipal water source, which most of us are, that's stored and processed and everything. The radon's going to come out long before it gets to you. If you're in a private well, then I'd have it tested. You never know until you test. Most radon comes from soil gas, some from building materials, some from water. Testing. Well, there's all kinds of ways to test out there. There's short-term charcoal devices. There's this thing is called an E-perm. This is a longer-term device called an AlphaTrack. The AlphaTrack devices that are out there today are a lot better than back in the 80s. This is a monitor that's made in Carlisle. This monitor was actually, the idea of this monitor in very early prototype testing was done in T-Building. And these guys took a golden handshake in '85 and went out and formed Femtotech and made tritium monitors and radon monitors. So this is kind of linked to Mound. And it's one of the better radon monitors out there. It's also one of the more expensive radon monitors out there.
It's linked to Mound.
And, you know, if you're going to test, there are protocols for doing so, or standards now, actually. You need to be, you know, this far from a wall, and you need to be at least this far from a window, this far from the floor. It says 4 inches from all other objects, but it's got to be sitting on something. It can't just levitate. Don't test in the kitchen or bathroom, or not in a closet, not in a crawl space, not in a sump. Somewhere where you actually live. And if you're, if I'm doing it, I put them everywhere. I put them in every room, regardless of.
Why can't it be in the kitchen?
Well, it's because you use water in the kitchen, and humidity might. Some of these devices are affected by humidity, so.
You mean you have higher levels than normal?
I'm sorry?
I mean, the kitchen at higher levels than normal.
Well, it's mostly the humidity is the problem. Is you use more water in the kitchen and the bathrooms, and it's the humidity is the problem.
Does that mean I shouldn't take a bath?
No, I don't recommend not bathing. Okay. Let's see, closed house. Oh, well, for short-term tests, you have to have closed house conditions for at least 12 hours before you start the test. So most of us in the summertime, we have closed house conditions because we are using air conditioning. It's 100 degrees out there or whatever. It's miserable. So even in the summertime, closed house conditions are not unusual. In the wintertime, they're usually unusual or very usual. Oh, well, I'm not going to go into this. If there is a radon problem, it can be fixed. Active soil depressurization is usually the way to go. And what that means is you see this fan, there's a fan right here exhausting to the roof, and it's pulling air from underneath the house. And the idea here is to not move a lot of air. The idea here is to reduce the pressure in the soil underneath the house so that when your house goes negative pressure, it doesn't overcome the negative pressure in the soil, and therefore your house isn't sucking on the soil gas anymore. That's usually the most efficient strategy. The idea is don't let the radon get in the house in the first place, or the building, whatever it is, rather than letting it get in and then trying to deal with it after it's inside. The best idea, don't let it in the first place. What did I do?
Question, so it looks like it's coming up through the cracks. Like if you have a solid floor, you would have less to worry about?
Yes, but there's always penetration. There's always entry pathways. And so mainly a mitigator, first of all, is going to seal all the cracks they can get to. But mainly just so you're not sucking conditioned air through the crack down into the soil and then back out again. You don't want to throw away your air-conditioned air or your heated air. And that's really the main reason for sealing all the cracks. And you can't seal them all, believe me. Believe me. I have slab on grade. This is typical, slab on grade. In the bathroom, there's an access door, port, hole, whatever. And you look in there and there's a 1 by 1 foot square hole. Ground, rocks. That's where the plumbing comes in for the bathrooms, right? So I monitored inside the wall there and it got 81 picocuries per liter. Well, no wonder I had high radon in my bathroom. Oh, by the way, too, I had somebody. I know this is off a sidetrack, but it's a good sidetrack. I had one employee come in with a high one in the morning. It was normal in the afternoon, and we gave him canisters. He measured it, and he got something not particularly high, maybe 10, 15 picocuries per liter. I don't remember. And so I said, I happen to know my house was running about 10 or 11 right then. And so I said, well, schedule me for a lung count tomorrow morning. And they did. And darned if I wasn't high. And of course, then normal after lunch. But I was floored. I was absolutely astounded that our lung counter could see radon decay products in our lungs at that level. Because that was really impressive that we could actually see that in lungs from that low level. Anyway, sidetrack. I gotta move on.
You mean at Mound? You don't do that now at?
Oh, no. I mean at Mound.
Okay.
I mean at Mound. Okay, can't we just seal the cracks? I think I just explained that. Well, you can seal the cracks, but you won't get them all and it won't fix the problem. If you have a crawl space, they can actually put down a barrier and then pull a vacuum under the barrier. That's the way you treat crawl spaces. I'm not a mitigator, by the way, so I'm talking a little bit out of my field. Typically, you drill a hole down until you get under the house, and then you scoop out a volume of soil and rock, so there's a space there you can pull a vacuum on. And like I say, you don't want to move a lot of air, but you want to pull a vacuum. It doesn't have to be a huge vacuum either, but it just has to be enough to lower the pressure throughout the whole footprint of the house. The fan, this is a typical looking radon fan, should be installed in the attic or garage or outside. You'll see a lot of them around Dayton that are outside. I don't like that. I would prefer it was in the attic. They're relatively quiet. If they're installed right. If they're installed wrong, they could be noisy. They don't use a lot of power, and you can expect them to live about 10 or 11 years before you have to replace them. I love this picture here. This was actually a very, very good article. It appeared in Dayton Daily, but I don't remember how long ago that was. But I think I still have the whole article. $1,200 radon job might have saved their lives, is what the basic statement here is. The discharge should be there are standards for where the discharge has to be, and it's got to be somewhere where it can't get re-entrained back into the house. You can see here minimum 10 feet above grade, 10 feet from openings, 2 feet above the eave. You don't put a rain cap on it, but you do put an animal screen, keep birds and rodents and stuff out. You can use things like sump pits, and sometimes one popular way is to actually dig a well on your yard and pull vacuum on it. That's pretty popular in Europe. It's not very popular here. New home construction, you can do things to make the home better equipped, I should say. The problem with new home construction, in my opinion, is that there's no regulation on the builders. Absolutely none. And so a builder can put in something which might be totally worthless, and they say this house is radon ready. They actually use that term, radon ready. And the homeowner buys the house and they say, builder took care of it, I don't have to worry about it. And they never test, they never know. Okay? I hear horror stories all the time of mitigators coming in, a builder putting something that's totally worthless, and they have to tear it out and start over. And it's because there's no regulation on the builders as to have any education whatsoever. There are lots and lots of resources that builders can go to show them how to put it in right. I think it is getting better, but I am wary of any house the builder says, you don't have to worry about it, you don't have to test, you don't have to do anything because I took care of it. These are some things you don't want to see. The fan actually, this is actually, I think they said it was at a crawl space, but that doesn't look like a crawl space to me, but I guess it could be. You don't want the fan inside, because if the pressurized leg of the downwind of the fan, if it starts leaking for some reason, you might be putting hundreds of picocuries per liter right back into your house. Now, in Canada, this causes a lot of problems. They don't want it in the attic or outside because of the extreme cold. So they don't enforce this in Canada, but it is enforced in the U.S., at least for now. As things have gotten much better, the probability of leakage is probably very, very small, because the mitigators are just a lot better now than they used to be. But anyway, the standards say you don't have the fan inside of a living space at all. Here's a situation where the discharge is just way too close to this window. But you'll see problems like this all the time. This is just an absolute nightmare. Whoever did that absolutely didn't know what they were doing. And unfortunately, most states have absolutely no regulations. There's only about 17 states that have any regulations at all. Ohio has a license requirement, an education and license requirement. So things like this shouldn't happen in Ohio. I won't say they don't. This is what one mitigator found when he tried to get in the attic. It's like, whoops. Okay, there's all kinds of documents out there on the EPA website. As things go along, the industry is developing standards, and a lot of those will be available, probably not totally free. But there's a lot of stuff out on the EPA website. Oh gosh, risk. I used to say that if you lived at 4 picocuries per liter all your life, your risk was about 1 in 100 of dying of lung cancer. That's not too bad. That's not too bad of a number for non-smokers. It's about they're saying it's about 0.7 instead of 1. But for smokers, they're saying it's about 6.2. So, you know, carcinogens are typically regulated at, 10 to the minus 5, 10 to the minus 6 risk. This is 10 to the minus 2 risk. It's orders of magnitude higher than most carcinogens are regulated. Solution, test. If the results are above 4, retest. Well, if they're below 4, retest every 2 years, or any major changes in your house or building. It's above 4, I would say shoot for 2 or less. Ohio does have laws. They have to have training, they have to be licensed. It's unlawful for an unlicensed individual to talk about radon entry pathways, which I've been doing all night. So I'm breaking Ohio law right now. Radon risk mitigation strategies. I'm sure they don't have a problem with me doing this. Why is radon ignored? Well, there's a lot of reasons. Probably the biggest one is naturally occurring. There's nobody to sue. You can't sue Mother Nature. That's probably the biggest reason. Long latency period, so it's not like something that happens right away, so it's obvious that, show me the dead body. All these reasons. And lung cancer does occur in children, by the way, but it just doesn't happen very often. Well, I skipped to the end of it.
I have a
Luckily,
question.
yeah, go
Are
ahead.
there any states that, when we get older and retired, are there any states that your district move to or not move to? Or stay right here?
Now I can't get there. I would just say, well, like I said earlier, if you're moving to the coast, it's probably not a problem. If you're moving to upper New England somewhere and you're on a private well, you might have a problem. Eastern Pennsylvania. There's a lot of areas, just about anywhere. Yeah, I went too far.
You overran.
Well, I'm going to have to skip some of these anyway. But there's some of these I want to go.
So we can move to Sweden?
Well, don't move to Sweden.
There.
Okay.
There are a lot of people are exposed through their work, not just radiation workers, but are exposed to radon from other sources. But literally, everybody's exposed to radon. And even people that just work in office buildings or whatever could be exposed to high levels of radon and never know it because nobody tests. And OSHA is supposed to regulate it, but they don't. And their regulations are way behind the times. That's a whole nother story. This one, I wanted to get to this one. This was the annual effective dose equivalent from all sources to the general public. And notice radon, 55%, somewhere here I'm missing the date. This is a few years old. Radon, 55% of all radiation dose to the general population. This is a more recent, 2009. Radon's only 37% now. Did the radon dose go down? No, the total dose went up. Why? CT scans and other medical procedures. Combine all the medical stuff and you have 48%. So the radon is still the same dose, it just is a smaller percentage of the total now. Radon, actually in the literature, radon, you can find radon that doesn't say radon, it doesn't say lung cancer, but that's what it is. It goes back even to 1556. Radon in miners causing them to die of some illness in their lungs, which they didn't know what it was, they didn't know what was causing it. But when you expose miners to thousands or tens of thousands of picocuries per liter, they're going to get lung cancer. And so there's lots of stuff in very old literature that points to radon. Oh, yeah, well, here's a, if your house is on stilts, you probably don't have a radon problem. Oh, and there's things like the Beer 6 report. There's things like, case control studies show that even below 4 picocuries per liter, there's people getting lung cancer. I'm not an epidemiologist either, but there's pooled epidemiological studies that point to that. World Health Organization had an international radon project, and I was a member of that. I wasn't at this meeting, I think this one was in Geneva. I was at the last meeting of the project in Munich in 2007. And then they created this handbook, World Health Organization handbook on indoor radon. I wrote parts of that and edited parts of that. Estimated 163,000 lung cancer deaths in 2005 and attributed to radon about 21,000 of that. So it's not trivial, not trivial. Should we be concerned since it pales by consideration to smoking? Well, it's right in there. Here's the total. Here's the part that they think is due to radon, and it's very comparable to leukemia and non-Hodgkin lymphoma and those kinds of things. Are we concerned about those? Yeah, I think so. Where to get a radon detector? I don't know whether RAPCA even exists anymore, but I suggest you go to a website called www.radon.com. If you want to do something yourself, I wouldn't go to the hardware store. I would go to www.radon.com and order some radon kits. They're fairly inexpensive, and I trust their quality assurance program. Yep.
State of Ohio EPA sells them for $9.95.
There you go. Go to the state of Ohio. Go to the Department of Health. I'm going to skip these because I think I touched on all of them. Well, here's the one I wanted to hit. Radon is always highest in winter. Well, I mentioned that. Well, I had all these anecdotal things that pointed me in that direction, which I talked about at least about one of them. But I didn't have hard data. So in 2008, I did a year-long study in the room that was right outside my office at Bowser-Morner and also in my home office in my house. And these are weekly average data using 2 different types of continuous radon monitors, and then this yellow thing's a much more inexpensive device that maybe homeowners could use for this. And they all tracked very well. But notice, when was the peak? It wasn't in the winter. It was about now. Okay, that's why I suggested that I do this in August. And the annual average, it just turned out to be was exactly 4.0, which is the actual level. and we actually need to mitigate our building. Now, this is my house. Well, and also, this is pretty much a closed room. I mean, there's very little doors open, and they're only open periodically for somebody coming in and out. So this is almost like a closed house condition. Or, well, it's like a closed house condition. This is my house. This is my home office. Notice, if you notice, this one, it only went up to 12. This one goes up to 18. And you got a lot more peaks and valleys because my wife likes to open windows in the summertime. And but we were gone a lot of this time, so a lot of this was still closed house conditions. But
So does opening the windows increase the radon or decrease it?
it could do either. You would think that opening the windows, you got ventilated air, you know, it's gonna dilute the radon. However, if you open the windows on the windward side of the house, or maybe the leeward side, I don't know, one of the sides of the houses, if the wind's blowing, it could actually create more suction in your house, and you could be sucking more radon out of the soil, just because you opened the window. Yeah.
Sir, will you be finished soon? My radon saturated butt is really beginning to hurt.
Yes, I'm almost done. Yeah.
These test canisters that you put in your basement, what are they capturing? Do they capture some of the decay products from the radon?
They're filled with charcoal, and charcoal actually adsorbs radon. It captures the radon. And so when you send it back in, what they're analyzing is the radon. They're actually looking at 2 of the radon decay products, but they're actually looking at what radon was captured, and they can relate that back to the concentration in the air that it was exposed to. Let's see. So anyway, after all these years, I now have a radon mitigation system. And actually, my house always was at 4, now it's at 8. So, or now it's not, but it was. And so I got a mitigator to come in, and this is the pipe that's down in the slab, and then goes up to the attic where the fan is, and notice the manometer is showing a pretty nice pressure drop there. He came back and put in an extra powerful fan, and I think he was trying to please me for obvious reasons. So now I can breathe easy. I want to point out there is a radon association called the American Association of Radon, and I lost part of the title here. It's the American Association of Radon Scientists and Technologists, which is a very unfortunate acronym, ARST. And now ARST has grown to the point where there's actually some things under the umbrella of ARST. National Radon Proficiency Program, which was started by EPA, is now under ARST, but it's a separate board, so they're not totally linked. There's an ARST Standards Consortium for writing industry standards. Again, it's a separate board, so they're not totally linked together. And now there's a 501c3 organization called the ARST Foundation that can do things like research and do things for environmental justice. And if you contribute to that, you can actually get a deduction on your taxes. There's also an organization called Cancer Survivors Against Radon, or CANSAR, and they have their own website. And they are a separate organization, but very closely tied. These people are either people that have lung cancer or a loved one. Ow, sorry. Some of these people are dear friends. Oh, wow, sorry. Or had a loved one that died of lung cancer, and they firmly believe it was caused by radon. And these are the people that are most effective to talk to our legislatures. Legislatures will listen to these people. They won't listen at all to the industry people. And these people are now going to Capitol Hill, they're going to their state legislatures, and they're getting things done. And it's incredible. And I'm done. Thanks for your attention.